Welcome you all to the sixth edition of Sense and Sensibility, hosted by Ethos, ASEG, and supported by NASA India. In May 2020, COA launched an essay writing competition on the topic Role of Architecture in Nation Building. I enrolled myself and started to read about the importance of the built environment in the process of constructing and structuring a national identity. What really stayed with me was the basic fact that a nation is compounded by its people. There may be many factors that contribute to nation building, yet its true success lies in how effectively the nation serves its people. Especially in a society of extreme socio-cultural and economic disparity, where many are deprived from the basic privileges of accessibility. Hence, it becomes important to conceive solutions that are respectful to every participant, solutions that can possibly be aided by holistic architectural approach, designs that enable healthier production of spaces and give rise to people-centric platforms, one wherein everyone has equal rights, freedom, and opportunity. This ideology was accorded by Mahatma Gandhi himself. With that spirit, today we are gathered here to talk about the concepts and relevance of Gandhian philosophy in architecture as we celebrate Gandhi Jayanti, World Architecture and Habitat Day, and Ethos's 18th anniversary. As a representative from NASA India, it gives me immense joy to collaborate with Ethos. NASA India, being one of the largest architectural student organizations in the world, has always strived for student empowerment through its activities. Similarly, Ethos and ASAGE strives for individual excellence through democratizing design education. We are delighted to foster this collaboration that aims to empower and educate students while enabling architectural education all over the country. And that also on Ethos's 18th anniversary. What a remarkable time. Geeta ma'am, we would love to hear from you about this journey. It must be exciting to see Ethos still continue to make such a huge difference.
Thanks, Aruna. Indeed, such a pleasure to have these stalwarts with us on Gandhi Jayanti and to have NASA as a partner. I'm just going to wait for Vedant or Ankita to share their screen because we have a few slides while I'm speaking. Yes, there we are. So yes, very well said, Aruna, about the need for equal rights, freedom and opportunity. And yes, absolutely, it's an overwhelming time for all of us at Ethos. What started as a thought, an idea, has grown into a beautiful forest with so many of our alumni doing so well in different parts of the world. We started Ethos with an objective to build awareness regarding our built environment. And it was an effort to equip students to be agents of change, to lead and not just follow, but to contribute towards the building of a harmonious society. We've been able to do that by various efforts, various initiatives, some of them being competitions and hosting events like Arcumen, Transparence, IGBC Green Design Competition. We have the Sengobain Scholarship, which is towards supporting innovative ideas. We have the Ethos Bridge Scholarships, which is a need-based scholarship in which we've also collaborated with NASA in the past on that. We have the Rasat, which is about lighting up our heritage. We recently launched an interior design quiz for Triple ID, which is called IDK. So various such events which we hope are enriching young minds, but old minds as well. A need was felt to bridge the gap between students undergoing education in colleges and outside in the professional world. A need to provide more opportunities to budding professionals and to create a platform, a network of young designers and civil engineers who will be decision makers in the years to come. So we've really been all over with some of our events. This journey has been a special one for many of us, and we've had Jaisim and Narendra Dengle sir who walked with us some of the miles. And these are some pictures where they were part of some of our events. I thought it appropriate. This goes back to 2005 in Pune. Yes, this was 2005 at the quiz, which is where there was a conversation on stage. Jaisim, this was 2011 in Hubli. And we have two giants Anil Lal and you on stage. Anil Lal, unfortunately, is not with us anymore. This was a team from BIT Mesra that won this regional event. This was 2009 in SRM Katangalatur. You have the trio here, Karan Grover, Christopher Benanja and Jaisim on stage. And this was also a very, very memorable event for us. The portfolio of ethos has since expanded over years with us identifying gaps and finding answers or solutions. The search and the mission continues, with the team at Ethos also having become larger. I mean, some of you would have interacted with some of our team members, and I think they are really committed and passionate, and we're fortunate to have drawing such wonderful talent towards us. It indeed feels good to see where we have reached after 18 years. We have space at Ethos in our hearts and in our mission to make a difference for as many hands that would like to reach out and support. So feel free to participate, reach out and be generous. To celebrate our 18th anniversary, we are undergoing a bit of a facelift. So besides, we've rechristened our various initiatives. We had IDAs, which is really the events portfolio, ASEDGE, which is into online learning, and PlayStill, which works on recruitments. I'm happy to announce that we will be launching our cause very soon on the 5th of October, which is the World Architecture Day and World Habitat Day. Our cause is something that's going to be focusing on the cause of architecture and architecture for a cause. And it's a venture that will harness the energy that we have garnered towards larger social causes. And I hope many of you will be partners with us on the same. We have a lot of campaigns, ideas for bringing about larger change. And we hope that there will be many hands that will join us in this venture. Look out for the same. 5th of October is when we are launching. To further commemorate this occasion today, we have launched our new website. It's still a little bit of work in progress. So we are coming up with ethosempowers.com, and when the session ends, you'll be able to log in, and there'll be a lot of things in store for you, but like I said, it's work in progress, and you'll see changes over the next few days on ethosempowers.com. And this event today, which you're all a part of, the 6th edition of Sense and Sensibility lecture series, is a part of the celebration of our anniversary. Now, Sense and Sensibility was really conceived to allow access to expert viewpoints from across the globe on holistic, non-compartmentalized, sensitive design solutions. Today, to celebrate Gandhi Jayanti, World Architecture Day and Habitat Day, and Ethos's 18th anniversary, we have with us two renowned architects. Not just renowned, I really respect them for their simple living and high thinking. Professor Narendra Dengle and architect Jaisim. Really fortunate to have both of you with us. I'd also like to remember Lal Bahadur Shastri today, because it wouldn't be right for us not to remember him on this day, which was also his birthday. I think so we are going to be commemorating that as well, in a sense, because yes, simple living and high thinking is something that was his tenet as well. Through the work that both of you, Narendra and Jaisim, have done over the past few decades and more, you've been able to cultivate such an image for yourself in the field of architecture. We would really love it for you to share a word of advice and encouragement to students, teachers, and everyone joining us from all over India to inspire us with what you've been doing through your work and your words. I'm going to begin with architect Narendra Dengle, Professor Narendra Dengle. A short introduction to him: a practicing architect, an educator, a writer. Be it the Universal Temple of Sri Ramakrishna on Sehagad Road, the Maharshi Karve Museum, or the urban design projects at Savitribai Phule, Pune, his works since 1974 speak for themselves. They've included projects addressing contemporary, cultural, environmental, and aesthetic issues. Being a faculty at the Building Beauty program at St. Anna Institute in Sorrento, Italy, he has written numerous books such as Jharoka, Gaitonde, a Painter, An Unstretched Canvas, and many more. And today he will be talking on the topic of Gandhi and the fabric of wholeness. Welcome to you, Professor Narendra Dengle, and I request Vedanta and team to take it from here.
Thank you, Geeta. Thank you, all of you. It's nice meeting Jaisim and everyone.
So we'll hear more from you during the dialogue, but let's just go to the presentation straight.
I should thank Geeta Balkrishnan and the SS team for inviting me to share my thoughts on Seva Ashram by Gandhiji in Wardha, as well as the concept of wholeness that one is concerned about at the moment and how that is connected with Gandhiji's life. So, and let me all wish you well. I mean, these are greetings on this Gandhi Jayanti, as well as this is to be the World Architecture Day as well, which falls on the 5th of October. So my greetings to all of you. As we all know, Gandhi's complex personality can be seen through many lenses. I mean, you see these personalities within Gandhi as a political person, as an activist, as a sort of Hindu Orthodox in the beginning, and then changing and going to South Africa. And many of you may have seen the Gandhi film also. So from that, you may have some ideas built in your own minds about him. Some may have read his books as well. He wrote some 100 books are there, I believe, you know, and they are all compiled into a very big library. So my own experience of Gandhi starts as a child, really, because my father was a freedom fighter. He was a student of engineering and he joined the struggle and he was underground, etc. Then he left. He left his engineering studies and remained in social work all his life. And he was a sort of Gandhian, socialist Gandhian in those days. And naturally, there was khadi in our house. He would always wear khadi until he passed away. And my mother also, right in the beginning. Later on, it changed. But my father remained a sort of person who was wearing khadi, and he would get this cloth from his visits to rural Bihar. And it was intriguing to look at that fabric. And this fabric is of very great importance to me at the moment, because if you see this as a kind of metaphor for how Gandhi views the whole society and brings the society, the various strands of religious strands, social strands, and regional strands into one fabric, it becomes very important. So I looked at it as a child, as a school-going student. I looked at it as a wonderful, rough fabric. It reminded me, I mean, today it reminds me of what one reads in Japanese Zen philosophy as wabi-sabi, which is the roughness as well as the beauty and serenity about it. So this was the fabric. What was this fabric about? So it's very intriguing to revisit this. Today, in my practice, I'm wondering what is the meaning of wholeness. And one thinks of wholeness of life is a very intriguing concept. And the wholeness comes about not as a mere concept which you apply in work, but wholeness is to do with yourself. And you and the society have to be related to imagine that the society and you are not two fragments, but you're part of the same whole. And therefore, I think this has to be understood in Gandhi's life. If you see Gandhi's life right from the beginning, you find that he belongs to a very, very orthodox Hindu family. And naturally, you know, what happens in the family is imbibed by the children. And he also became a very orthodox in those days. For him, it was all the time, if you see his autobiography that he wrote, you see that there is no ending to his learning. Every time that he is walking out of the house to the school, to meeting friends, to making new friends, or travel to England to study law, or later on come back to India and go to South Africa, you find that his life is full of taking so many bends that one does not know in advance. I mean, if you imagine that you're planning your life, it is not like that. You cannot be planning your life entirely. So you are taking chances, you are being adventurous, and you're learning. And the process of learning is not through the books, neither through your only experience that you collect on the basis of what your parents told you, but you're all the time changing, you're modifying, you're a new person every day. As it is said that you can't step into the same river twice because water is flowing and you dip your foot in it. And the next moment you dip it again, the water has changed, the river is new. So similarly, the person has undergone massive changes in his consciousness, in his behavioral pattern, in his habits, as he appears to the near ones, as well as to his friends and foes. And therefore, this change is very important to face. Gandhi faced this very methodically. And therefore, you know, it reminds me that I think a couple of years back, in India, there was some kind of an argument going in the press, and it was imagined that different communities can be understood by the dresses that they wear. And so there was an argument to and fro. And I also learned that argument, and I sort of talked to the historian, and I said, look here, as architects and planners, we all the time are using this word called fabric. You know, we use this fabric as social fabric, urban fabric, fabric of the city, fabric of community. What exactly do we mean by that? And this fabric is a very, very interesting kind of analogy, if you like. And later on, even in Japan, you find that there was a fiber city being planned by architects like Maki. So they were planning fabric. They used this term because fabric is something that you weave. You imagine that there are different strands and you don't know from where these come. So you are connected with where the strands come from. And if it's a fabric of built of cotton, then you have to find out from where this cotton emerges. And Gandhi's entry into Khadi became very intriguing because when he was trying to invest, he was not familiar with handloom. He was not familiar, he had not seen a spinning wheel. When he sort of discovered that this was going to be a very important aspect of his thinking. And when he discovered it, it was a very important turn in his sort of direction that political movement took. And you realize that the fabric in those days was made by mills. So the mills were making the sort of yarn, and the yarn was given to even the handlooms, which were in different villages. And this is the kind of yarn that these villages used. Traditionally, they would make their own yarn because they would use the spinning wheel and they would make their own yarn. So even tribal areas and rural areas, this was a very common factor throughout this country. If you go to Northeast, you come to the central India, you come down south, you have handloom as a very common thing. And this is something that is important to note. A handloom involves handicraft, and it uses your limbs. Today, it's very fashionable for us as architects and students of architecture to imagine hands-on work. But there is no other work, actually. You are hands-on all the time. If you're busy with this, there is no difference between intellectual work and the hands-on work. You have to combine all the two all the time. Now here one realizes that he he finds out where the spinning wheels are located, and he finds them in the region of Baroda. In those days, it was Baroda. And in the region of Baroda, he finds that there are spinning wheels, and the weavers communities are there. And he decides for his movement, which was sort of to throw the colonial rule out, he decides that we have to raise from within and connect everybody together. So if you see the political movement, the villagers, the tribals, the different cities, different regions who were having their own identities, linguistic identities, they dress differently, how would they come together? And you see this master stroke, I would say, that Khadi sort of bonded everybody together. That this is the fabric, it became kind of a national fabric, and everybody sort of, but Gandhi's thing was not only Khadi, because if you have to see the philosophy extended into how the environmental planning is done, how the sanitation is done, how the waste is treated, and how the buildings are generated, with what ideas, and with whom. So if you see that he was very much concerned about the waste of carcasses lying in the small towns and villages, and the dead animals left carcasses, and who would handle them. So he comes to Konkan, which is south of Una and close to Goa, and he encourages a very upper caste Brahmin to look at carcasses. It was unheard of. Upper caste Brahmins would, in those days, be responsible for prayers and temple duties and teaching. But here, this gentleman, Appasaheb Patwardhan, was told to collect carcasses and utilize the skin of animals and the bones and everything. So he sets up an ashram. So he encourages him. And you see the designs of toilets, you see the designs of the houses done there, and with the complete view of segregation of excreta and the waste, the liquid matter, and using, this gentleman used to carry these dead animals over his head, over his shoulders, and into this, and he used to treat. So that was a kind of a tool which helped breaking barriers between castes, between regions, between communities. So he was using this fabric. Now, if you see, this is a kind of a simile, or this is kind of a parallel thinking going on, that khadi is not just a cloth, a woven of thing, but the conception is much wider, with much wider significance, that bringing South and North together, East and West together, and bringing them together. So you find that not only was this extended to leather and to organizing earth, to organizing, looking at local materials and arresting waste. As you must also realize that there was no concept of waste with the tribal communities. Waste, I'm told by some scientists, that the concept of waste comes with the automobile, that you don't know what to do with the parts of the body. But here, and this concept, as us architects and environmental planners who are concerned with recycling, etc., that we keep talking about, this is very important. Now, you see this, like a master weaver, therefore, Gandhi goes into his specifications for building ashrams. And you see, ashram is a concept that has attracted the Indian mind all the time. Everybody, all senior people think of sort of retirement. They are thinking of vanaprasthashram, and it's kind of embedded into the concept, into the consciousness. So everybody, you see Rabindranath Tagore, for instance, built a wonderful campus. Tagore believed in education which was provided in the surroundings of nature. That there are trees, you can listen to birds, and you have actually, you're doing things and you're generally in the open. Only when required, you're under a shelter. So that was the concept of schools. And a similar idea is echoed by even Louis Kahn later. Kahn also said that school is, a senior person sitting under the canopy of a tree with younger people, and then there is sharing of knowledge. So this is what has attracted the Indian mind always. So Gandhi also goes and builds this ashram, first ashram, then first or whether second, I'm not sure, but the ashram in Ahmedabad, it was built on a cremation ground. So now again, a new taboo is broken that you can't build on a sort of cremation ground. And it is surrounded by Dalit bastis. So he goes there and puts his ashram there, and he's growing trees, he's building things, and therefore a community is also wondering what Mr. Gandhi is doing. And you realize that there is a bond created by, it's a kind of a vertical bond between upper caste, lower caste, this way, that way, and various religions. So you see this. Gandhi also had this ability to build fabric across disciplines, which meant, bringing people of versatility, great versatility. You have Nehru, you have Sardar Patel, you have Kripalani, you have Acharya Vinoba Bhave, and people like that, of that caliber, they all come together. And sort of Jayaprakash Narayan, Acharya Narendra Dengle, all these people are coming together and building in the task of building the fabric of this nation. So he was also a great listener. Now in Sevagram, which was, I believe it was built and designed by Mira Bain, who was his disciple, but of course at the instruction of Gandhi. And there was a limited budget, and there was a very clear instruction as to what material could be used. It had to be from the surroundings. Perhaps we can see some slides now here. Sevagram Ashram, I thought, I don't know how many of you have seen this, and I would like to sort of share this Sevagram Ashram with you. Yeah. Now, if you look at, can you all see this? Yes? You can see the grounds here. You can see the trees and how the buildings are juxtaposed. What is the distance between the buildings? What are the areas demarcated for? What materiality is there? Sure enough, all this construction requires maintenance. But body requires maintenance. As we said, that the fabric requires maintenance. Fabric requires to be darned. And even this Japanese architect Maki also believed that fiber, he used the fiber cities because cities can be darned. Cities cannot be demolished, but they can be darned. They can be sort of minor alterations can be done to this. So you find here the large open spaces, the trees, the environment, their prayer areas, their interaction areas. Next, please. You can see that there is a prayer being held here. On the left-hand side of the screen, you find a place where Gandhi would sit against this inclined back, and he would probably give a talk, or he give a sort of bhajan here. And you can see the construction closer. Now we can go to the third slide. Here, another thing that we have to also notice, that Gandhi has faced a lot of opposition, a lot of controversies in his life, including those of his colleagues in those days, including that of Dr. Ambedkar, who was a scholar and who was a great organizer. And he said to Gandhiji that your perspective of the communities is from outside, but you have to feel the pain of the communities from within. And Dr. Ambedkar says to Gandhi, true equality is possible when we all feel equally humiliated. Now imagine why he used the term humiliated. the lower caste people, the villagers, they're humiliated by upper people, upper caste people, or more learned people. And in the process, you lose out onto the crowd because everybody has strengths and weaknesses. You have tremendous strengths of these tribal who live there, within a very humble sort of surroundings. So this is the kind of thing that Ambedkar kept fighting Gandhi with. Next, please. And this is the detail of some of the kutirs here. And you have one of these kutirs has Gandhi's kutirs, and there is a library within his toilet. He used to read. He was always sort of constipated a little bit, although he used to take walks early morning, and they're very nicely kept today, even today, and it requires maintenance cost. Next. And at the same time, next please. And at the same time, you realize that he had no objection. He didn't have a sort of taboo against construction with brick and mortar, because at one place you're told that where in forests something had to be built, a school had to be built, and for that school bamboo and thatch was used, and it was set fire to by people who did not want it. But then he realized that yes, and then somebody said we should build this as a little more pakka schools. So he accepted. So this is where he kept changing many things. He walked out of his own sort of traps of the orthodoxy into a much more wider field. Next, please. In this ashram came a lot of people and stayed, including some of you may know actor Balraj Sahni and his illustrious brother, who was a writer, Bhim Sahni, Bhisham Sahni. And you find that both of them exchanged thoughts with them. And every morning when Gandhi went out for a walk, he would welcome people to come and talk to him. Anybody could go and talk to him. So this person, who was probably the busiest person and most sought after person in the whole country in those days, accepted meeting people and changing his view or changing their view. Next, please. Now, this construction also for us would indicate that it was not shabby construction. It was a very articulate work, very thought-provoking work. At the same time, very simple, very humble. On the left is his meditation room. On the right, you can see how the place was ventilated. Varda is a very hot place, and you had to have hot air climbing up and escaping through clear story. And so you've got clear story here. You got windows with small kind of dampers, the louvers, which sort of operate. So you have amazing things happening here. And, people like Doshi and Joseph Allen Stein, some of you may know, when they went there, they were quite floored by the simplicity. How do you achieve this? With what thought? Was it trained? I mean, were you trained as an architect? Did you make drawings of this? And you find that not necessarily. That the idea that you have in mind, the drawings are only means. And you can actually create this idea without making drawings at times. So this was a very important thing. Next, please. And this was also, this is a very important thing. This is a sort of massage plank or a table. And you find that he was very concerned about the body. Now, he was not concerned about the body as body alone, but body as the kind of home for his spirit. And the spirit and the mind and the body had to go together. Again, we have also learned this from many songs and ideals of various colleges and schools and universities who talk about body, mind, and soul without actually paying attention to it. Now, Gandhi's life is different. He is not only thinking about this intellectually, but he is trying to bring this together against all odds. He may face opposition politically, he may face opposition from within his own party, from the opposition parties, from different communities, or from the British in those days, but he has, access, and he listens to all to sort of develop his own mind. Next, please. So that is about Sevagram. The wholeness, the idea of wholeness between the individual and community, and the whole idea of God. Also, it's a very, very abstract thing. Nobody has seen God. But for Gandhi, God was equivalent to truth. So he was searching for truth in his life. And that truth is something that he not only found from books, religious books, or other intellectual or theoretical books, but he comes and experiences them in this ground reality. And that's where he is able to modify his views. So he realizes when he goes to Paris, he is reminded by this Tolstoy's pointer. He says, this Eiffel Tower, Tolstoy had remarked that the Eiffel Tower was a monument to man's folly, and he disparaged it completely. So he was learning there, and self-introspection becomes very important. While traveling in India, he goes to Ayodhya, and then his colleagues want him to visit the temple in Ayodhya, the Ram Mandir. So Gandhi says, I'm not interested in the historical Ram. Ram is not Dasharath's son. Ram is not Sita's husband. But Ram is behind that. Behind that meaning the spirit. And then he says that when Sita Maya and Ramji start wearing khadi, I will come and visit the mandir. So this is a very important thing. And you realize that the craft that we notice, humble craft in the local material, he's using his craft also to bring people together, molding their views, making leaders out of them, and sort of negotiating all the time with communities and things like that. So his craft becomes very important, even to sort of throw the British out. He believed that violence and legitimacy to violence will destroy all walks of life, because leading to celebration of violence is something that Gandhiji abhorred and cautioned us against. That he said, violence, if you take faith in violence, if you start defending it in any form, in your mind, in your hearts, within your homes, in architecture or in planning, if it's a violent gesture, I don't know, you will see for yourself which buildings you think are violent environmentally, and you will take a call yourselves. I don't want to say anything more than that. But leading to celebration of violence will destroy human beings and this planet completely. So this is what one must learn from Gandhi on this Gandhi Jayanti. And I hope that you're able to look into his works and be inspired. You don't have to take everything by word, but the word will point to something else. And those are the things that I think are very important. Thank you very much for being patient and listening to this.
Profound indeed, extremely thought-provoking. You, ended with saying that what we read and observe, not just about Gandhiji, I presume, when you say is not to be taken at face value, but actually you try and see how you can draw lessons for what we do in our everyday activities and lives. It was interesting to see how, some of your narration was anecdotal because you seem to have had a close association with Gandhiji through your father's role in the movement and so on. From your childhood days, how the spirit of Gandhiji was kind of woven into your life and probably brings in this added perspective to your work. So glad we asked you to be here. To hear of terms such as darning of cities and buildings, khadi woven into lives, khadi being the great equalizer and the unifier, drawing parallels between holistic approaches of Gandhi and our own approaches, and even a reference to violence of buildings and violence in lives, and making sure we don't celebrate any kind of violence. I think great lessons for us to take away from your presentation. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions, and we will be taking that on. But thank you so much for bringing in this way of looking at Khadi, Gandhiji. I mean, something that I think the youngsters today do need to also be exposed to. We'll move on to architect KrishnaRao Jaisim. I think before that, I'd like to just say that we chose to record these sessions prior while these stalwarts are present here for the Q&A, simply because we didn't want to experiment with internet today with places that we are in for this particular session at least. And hence, but the videos, if in case someone has a lag with their videos, it will be available on your dashboard for you to see properly as proper recordings as well. So moving on to architect Jaisim, a dear friend. New York Times, The Hindu, The Times of India, Deccan Herald, you name it, just a few of the publications in which he is featured on a regular basis. Having received awards like the JK Architect of the Year Award 1992, JK Simmons Chairman's Award, this fountainhead of architecture, Jaisim, has been practicing since 1966. I wasn't born, Jaisim. The name behind the Ashok Vora residence, Machani and Suvidha, a retirement village, his iconoclastic views and individualistic efforts are the hallmarks of his creativity. Today, he continues to pursue the adventures of the built environment, searching and researching beyond the boundaries of space and time. I see his smiling presence at so many online sessions that I am at, and really amazed at his energy at that age to be wanting to be part of this learning, that this new age learning that's happening. So welcome, Jaisim, and looking forward to you speaking about the Gandhian concept of village as the future of urbanism. Over to the team.
Namaskar to all of you on this phenomenal day, which brings India on the subcontinent, in a manner of speaking, to many memories. I'm not trying to focus this particular time to a very fascinating human personality and his direct and indirect involvement in the built environment and architecture. I shall try to focus on that with this touch of politics and philosophy towards the spaces of what I would call urbanized architecture. Now, if you start looking at India, right from 4,000, 5,000 years back, and look at it without the name India on it, it is a continent that pushed itself into the continent of Asia, and a phenomenal civilization grew from it. It's a very fascinating civilization who grew so much on their own without interfering in anybody else outside and inside. Many religions crossed through it. Many spaces were invaded and divided. There were many things that happened. One of the factors that happened was very fascinating to a point. Throughout the end of the years, this diversity was never disturbed. We're never disturbed by the continuous focus of people bringing people together. This has been my opportunity to learn in a way and then disperse many factors of life. One of the factors I'm going to touch very strongly in the future of habitats, the future of urbanization. One of the big things that happened in this subcontinent is through the majors, few cities got very focused. Delhi, Agra, Madras, Bombay, Calcutta, and maybe a few other secondary cities. But the more they started focusing, something else happened. The Western mobility of movement, which were on large continents and pushed into small spaces of urbanization, started happening. the village life started disintegrating. The political control became central rather than the factor of life within small communities. This is going to go into touch when I read about Gandhi expressing from this big future of a great, one of the richest men, and then trying to unfold into an area of what the normal Indian was in those days, in 1930s, 40s. He literally shred everything off. I'm looking at this in a very different way, in a philosophical way. When you shred urbanization or focused cities, and then bring back yourself to the nakedness of the subcontinent, what happens? He did this in a very fascinating way, showing it as a human physical person. But I knew the inner strength of him, which I learned after reading, is something phenomenal. It's something unbelievable when he does it. Because when he focuses it, you suddenly realize that he was indirectly directing his focus and attention to the small villages and small people. This gave me an opportunity to visit some of the villages totally not disturbed and some villages that were disturbed. This disturbance was through urbanization factors, because what happens through technology that comes, communication that happens, there is a huge movement by industry and high-tech people. They need fast communication between spaces. But they forget the initial fundamentals of what they are doing. What they brought in for, to make human life greater value. This again when I looked back at some of the villages that were not disturbed, that were never touched, not physically, I think, except by a few soft circumstances. You walk into those old villages, you find people sitting around spaces, discussing things. If the discussion becomes stronger, then they go into another space. Then they go into the slightly larger space, the bigger community, and then you move into a larger space. You call this soft neighborhoods, undisturbed by the traffic or modern traffic, undisturbed by buses, lorries, trains, and all this. Maximum a cycle or a motorcycle might move it. I learned this and I saw this physically also in reality. Some of the new village urbanization things that have happened just outside Bangalore and a few outside Karnataka, which I accidentally visited. I was surprised and shocked to see that these people who are top industrialists and top IT people have suddenly come back to this country, realized the Gandhian value of living a simpler life without discomforting their basics. I found in fact, it took me to a phenomenal space. What you're seeing is all something real, which we have built over the last 5 decades after seeing many of this. You use the local space, you use the local earth, and you use the local communication, and yet bring in the best of technology to make this continue to happen, which means you're not cutting yourself off from the rest of the world. What happened in the older villages where they cut themselves off from the other villages or the other communities or other religions or other people? This is where religion started focusing them on spaces. That is where the danger started. Religion should be slowly shifted, maybe maximum in your home, nothing beyond the home. What happens like this at Rishi Valley School or at the valleys, at the silent valleys which we designed? We found the local expertise, the local culture of the people had tremendous expression. And when you fuse them with modern technology and modern communication, something can happen without disturbing their acoustics, their way of living. And yet, they're not the same people they were living. It looks like a contradiction sometimes, but when you start looking at them, you find they brought in people, fused them together, sent out people, fused them with some others, which means there was a movement between villages. It was not just stuck in one space. It is not that I am the village, I will not go there. It is not like one of those beautiful maxims and things which you start reading, which will start coming into my head as I go. But here, we must remember that agriculture played a huge task. But what was agriculture? Agriculture was disturbing the forest, disturbing the natural, and then bringing a way of life. Then came the industry, which destroyed the agriculture. So agriculture can't blame industry, industry can't blame agriculture, agriculture can't blame forest. This is where when I sit with some of the environmentalists now, they say, you should bring back the forests. Then I start smiling and they start smiling. Yes, we were harmony, nobody. Then we grew into huge population, one of the largest populations on the earth today. And yet we have a sense of space. This made me look into living habits of people. They go abroad, come back, borrow many things from there and come back. When I look at the snail, when I look at the bees, when I look at the ants, yes, something else happens into my mind as an architect. Then I start looking at Gandhi's way of life. Gandhi said, you don't have to give up the present. You don't have to give up tomorrow. But you must understand yesterday and fuse them in such a way that what exists today can be projected tomorrow without disturbing tomorrow. This, to me, was a fascinating factor which I learned from another fascinating person who believed in similar thinking, was Krishnamurti. One day, when I was an young architect, he called me and said, I've heard of you, some people, he was a very fascinating person, build a school. Then when I started looking at things and sketching, he said, I like the plan and the sketches movement, but he looked at me, smiled and said, only one point. And his assistant was a youngster with me. He said, this building which you designed should not be there after a few years. There must be a sense of transformation. Today is not tomorrow. Yesterday is not today. It was something that opened my eyes and my brain of architectural thinking phenomenally. It said, nothing should be permanent, even for a monument. Something should happen. But when I see my own projects and say, should I preserve it for next year, for the next decade, for the next generation? He said, if somebody makes it into something else and then creates another environment out of it, yes, but the same environment, the same cannot continue. A home can become a museum can become an artifact. Something else can happen, which means the spaces an architect creates should be able to blend with the future without disturbing. This was an eye-opener. This is when the urbanization factor hit to me and said, if we start looking, when I started looking at this, I said it's very difficult to change the big urbanized cities. That is when the fact hit me that the big cities, the cities that are growing huge, must be allowed to die. That brought the big dialogue saying cities must die. That opened up another future factor of thinking, which made the outer circumstances of the peripheral of the city grow. Now, if the peripheral holds it back or somehow opens it back, and then the third and fourth level villages, which start growing. When that happens, something else happens. People will not unnecessarily move. I'm going to jump a few sections here and say, this is where technology helps. Communication helps. I don't have to live in an urban, hardcore city to be able to live my life fully, to live my life totally. I love my solitude, I love my loneliness, I love my... Now I came to that point where Gandhi started looking at various factors in his life, from being a super rich gentleman to bringing the clothes off. Now, as I said, the cities must also take the clothes taken off. That is, the changeover happens. When the changeover happens, something fascinating happens. You start realizing and looking at structures, you start looking at spaces, you start looking at human ethos, you start looking at human being as a totality, not just small areas. But you also start looking at them as small areas for a different reason. People have to communicate. People have to talk. People have to change ideas. That is the fundamental of all human life. Because only then knowledge happens. You start growing, something fascinating happens. Now, when that fusion happens, it looks like a contradiction in the beginning, but it starts growing much more. Now, it doesn't anyway hold back technology. It doesn't anyway hold back what I would call the arts, but It tells both art and technology its particular space. It very clearly tells art, you cannot bind the future with your past. It also tells technology, you can't overrun art without looking at the art part, the aesthetics part, the sense of human life part. Then something blends. Architecture happens, the environment happens. Then the people of a nation or people of a space start communicating. Here, communication becomes a very big space. Now, there was another big factor of housing and things came up, which on my slides sometimes I show. Because he always talked, people should have shelter. What does that shelter mean? It is not just bringing technology from somewhere and building something. What does a person require? When I first met Rajaji, along with MS Lakshmi and Sadasivam and all this, back in the 70s, something opened my eyes because they were connected to the Gandhi family. And I met Rajmohan Gandhi and others. I didn't know he was a person. It took me to another line of thinking. How much space do you require? The man became a governor. He could afford anything. But he said, I need a place to work from. I need a place to talk to people. I need a place of sense of privacy when I want, for my wife, me, and I should be able to cook a little bit for myself. Then, as we started looking, what we need is a small veranda, a small cleaning space at the back, a little communication for 2-3 people. And in fact, we shot away chairs and tables, except for people who could not sit on the ground. We used put a mat and a few pillows. Then we found the bedroom had 2 beds and a small toilet which can be used and cleaned. So this is the minimal and good space. Can you do it? So we built it, and we built it for many other people too. And we found another condition was put up. That's why he said, should you shape it to a particular space? He said, no, it depends upon the organic spaces that are available. This came as a thinking process. So buildings took the form which was influenced by the local labor, local context, local land, local terrain. All this started influencing the process of architecture. Something very fascinating happens. You don't have to pre-design something in some factory, come and dump it. That is when I learned the next factor. That is why I said some slides can be shown and some slides passing. Like huge organizations like Hutco and all in the beginning, after they opened, were very imaginative. But after some time, what I call the public power takes over and they are not interested. They just build repeated housing. This is where we started intervening with nature and things and said, look at the ant hill or the beehive or the nest of any bird or any other animal's caves or whatever you want. You will find there is a sense of identity to that particular species. But show me 2 anthills that are identical. Show me 2 hives that are identical. Never. Then why are our houses built by builders identical? And we humans can think, we humans can act, we humans can. Suddenly something came, you must think and act, not act and then think over. That became a big issue. Then I found that was the fundamental of architecture, the fundamental of design. That started focusing into the head in a very large way. For the simple reason, for the sake of urbanization, forests were cleared. Then another factor that came up, connecting cities, connecting bigger urban factors. Somebody would design a highway sitting somewhere with no idea of the terrain, no idea of the forest. It's now, even now happening, and simply connect. What would they do? They cut and divide the villages into. Initially, I was a little worried. I think as an young architect, I found that you could easily move around and go. You can easily not violate the principles or the lifestyles of the villages. But another factor intervened in this space. When we did that village for Tamil Nadu at some time, and for another state also sometime, taking the highway around the villages, after a few years, I found that the village moved to the highway because they saw the new trend of urbanization, the new trend of economics, this new speed of communication. This became a soft contradiction. But then the contradiction was forced. Something happened. Had the communication been at a lower pace level, not force high speed level, something would have happened. The train did a few things in the beginning miraculously. Unfortunately, the buses initially started, then it started violating high speed cars. Another process of thought process happened. If somebody really wants to go from place A to place B without going through the other multi spaces, they can fly, they can take a helicopter, they can move around. Why go on the roads? Why can't roads be a journey of adventure, of discovery, rather than just from A to B? That became a phenomenal focus of understanding. That became a focus of trying what I call as reurbanization. People should start looking at new cities, not just as villages, but not also as cities. Can you fuse the village into the city? Can you bring the technology and other factors into the city, into the village city? See, I'm even automatically using the word, trying to make them understand, like many of these places, we use the local materials to communicate. We use the local materials to build factors that happened. It became a big factor. It became something that rejuvenated the locals, the villagers, to suddenly realize that they had a language, they had a way of expression that no outside world can teach them. One thing the outside world forced themselves upon them. These workers and these laborers really taught me many things. Even now when we are building some farmhouses and things, people, when you look at them, they're just in a veshti or some dhoti and walking around. But when you talk to them and say, the amount of knowledge they have is unbelievable. Nothing that I can ever learn. Only thing, I have a PhD, I have a master's, I have a degree. They have nothing, but they have a much bigger thing. They have real depth of knowledge. They have real depth of understanding where they are, why they are. And when they sit and communicate with you in the evening, it's unbelievable. It's phenomenal communication that happens. Now, another factor that how architects and others can play in this, when I looked at the role of ahimsa in this, I'm using it as an architectural ahimsa, non-violence by material. Can you use a material without disturbing its origin? It became a challenge. Now you see a spot, luckily the slide came exactly at the time I wanted. Why should we disturb the surface of the earth? Again, Gandhi, I looked at Gandhi's way of perception. Why are we disturbing it? Why don't we leave the earth alone and go? Two challenges happen from it. Can we go underground? Can we go what is called biothermal spaces? Can we leave the outside of the surface as beautiful as they are, naturally bound, and then create everything else? And from whatever we dug, then I found these examples 4,000 years back in Egypt, in other areas, even in India, in subcontinent and everything. People lived in this. And today you have the technology to get air, light, air conditioning, all the 19 disciplines that get a built environment can be done. Something fascinating happens to life. And then it doesn't repeat itself like the modern builders repeat, or many things happen. That is where the Builders Association must get stronger and more meaningful in the way they describe and explain things. It should happen in such a way that they make sense, not just make us into some animal. And I won't even use the word some sort of a dumb unit, one over the other. And the other big factor is another challenge of the oceans and the space above. When the challenge of the space above came, yes, it's already opening up. One thing I wish the Western architects and others, or the Indian architects, could design these spaces, design them in context of that space. So I saw some examples from somewhere. They just built the same building up there. That is ridiculous. The human being is not thinking. Then the other challenge was the ocean. 3/4 of the earth is the ocean. But the ocean smiled when I started studying it. Up to 30 feet, 40 feet I could go. But once I went deeper, it started challenging. Then I realized that challenge will take me another 100 years, 200, maybe 300 years to cross the challenge. That is a huge future. Why are we worried about it? We will do what we can at the moment here. We will do what we can do within our space of control or within our space of understanding, which is easier. This urbanization factor or reurbanization factor is a Gandhian factor, a simplistic factor. If I can get that going as neighborhoods, and then neighborhoods joining other neighborhoods in context of the larger urbanization, and the large urbanization factors joining with other big urbanized factors, something else will happen. That happening will be something that challenges the human mind. Many people criticized Gandhi for various other factors. It looked very simple when he ate anything, but I also used to do it. I used to have fun and things. But when I started this particular forum essay, has really opened my eyes to a way of looking at people in greater depth, the real meaning behind what they did. Something happened. Something really, really went in there. They talked something more than what they showed. Everybody from every level of understanding saw the person as what they understood. The highly intellectual person, the highly involved person, he meant something else. For the person in the ground level, just working day to day, he meant something else. But that single figure could communicate. That is why the famous artist, the sketch, when they said, "What is Gandhi?" He just put a spectacle. I was initially just put a spectacle, but in that single spectacle, he could express Gandhi. But in many ways, that glass was unique to him. And yet glass is technology right up to today's life in those days, which means it is really great. It is not that you see with your own eyesight, you see with the eyesight of high-level technology. In the single frame, he could express this. Lakshman was a phenomenal cartoonist. That cartoonist expressed in one sketch what that man's life was. This made me understand and express my buildings and my projects also in think. But now I'm trying to see the connection. Can architects, can environmentalists express these ideas without unnecessarily being influenced by what I today call as, I would call it, it's the media culture, you might call it. Today, media must change. Today, media, which is purely the TV and things, see something fascinating somewhere in the West, somewhere beyond the ocean, bring it back and build it in India. I always have a laugh when I find some foreign architects or town planners come here. They have no idea for ethos. They have no idea for lifestyle. They just flatten the land like Mumbai builders used to do in Bangalore and build tall buildings. We, like idiots, like familiar, you looked at these 50-story, 40-story building and just said, oh, now it is really, oh, it's a mess. That understanding must come back. That comprehension must come back. If that happens, I understand we will not only use their technology, we will use their technology better than they have done it. We will understand the system of health, system of happiness, the system of what I would call lifestyle in a much higher level than what. This is where when I even read back into one of my pages which my mother had given the sketches, which one of these things, I said, yes, the man could explain it. People have misunderstood this various factors. Even if there's no central spaces are required at all, we just lit and eat somewhere and move somewhere. Every action of human being has what I understand a meaning. In the silence, there is sound. In the sound, there is silence. Because when the sound is not, doesn't have the sense of vibration, it goes somewhere else. It goes gone. But when the sound becomes music, the sound has something else happens. Then communication happens. You may call it language. Initially, somebody's language may appear to you simply as sound and noise. But when you start listening to what I call as the vibrations and then certain patterns, this is where we touch. There's a pattern. Now look at Gandhi's life again. There is a very deliberate pattern. Wherever he went, wherever he said, even when he went to London, he made sure and ensured that his pattern continued. And that pattern evolved beyond the pattern of repetition to a higher level of senses, which fused with the 5 senses, with the 5 elements, combining them in such a way that the context and the content played with each other, depending on the place, depending on where they went. It really became a journey. It really became a challenge. And for our practice, it has been a fusion. Now I've understood, I used to do this all on my own, thinking now you've added a greater in-depth value to what I was looking at. Can I push it to a higher level of work process? I find, yes, one can continue this. One can get the sense of a single person expressing through million voices an unbelievable future. People should understand this in a different way than what they have understood. It is not just liberalization. That's when he said, I will go to cross the borders. He didn't want the limitation of politics, of national boundaries to hold people together. He wanted to cross these boundaries. That is why he said, we should fuse the earth together and then live with tremendous diversity. That is what the future, that is called the diversity in the world, the fusion of the global earth and beyond. You will find a great future opens for architects, for environmentalists, for every profession, for every media, for every human life on this earth becomes unique. We can translate, we can go from one part of the earth without visas and passports. We are now not even able to cross one state to the other without documents. That is, you have become a prisoner of your soul and self. That imprisonment must go. That imprisonment of the cloth was the expression of freedom from the binding. That is what I learned. That cloth throwing away was the freedom from the binding. If that can happen to us and move beyond the shackles of what we have learned over periods of time, I believe the future of the subcontinent, the future of architecture, the future of environment, the future of mankind's life on this earth will go beyond what any dreams, but it will be a process. It need not come tomorrow. It should evolve and evolve and evolve and come. I'm very confident that very soon it will happen. All namaskars to all of you for patiently listening to me. The technology defeated me sometime, using a laptop to a phone. I hope all these things come out together. I must thank all of you for patiently listening to what I have tried to learn, pushed by Gita and pushed by this flow, Asantya, Vedantya, and all my little office and my little practice to push into the different practices. Namaskars and thank you very much. Any questions? If I know answers, I'll tell you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jaisim. Poetic as usual. A good session. It really brought about a interesting perspective to Gandhi's philosophy and how they've directly or indirectly contributed to the vision of a built environment. Suggesting villages as units of economic autonomy because they're small enough to permit everyone to participate directly. While it seems like common sense, it actually is something that not many have been able to internalize. I'm sure there are many questions that are coming your way and Dengle sir's way. Much as Gandhi believed in the power of villages, he also believed in the strength of youth, and there are many youngsters present here today who can be agents of change, who contribute towards building this society of ours. And they need support and guidance from a generation that have gone through a journey. And today is not tomorrow, like you said, and yesterday is not today. You said learn from yesterday. So really, I think I love this to get into the question and answers where there would be questions that would come your way and people can learn from you. Begin with asking Arunavo to start with his first question. Arunava, let's go with your first question. And there are many from the audience that we can take as well.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Firstly, thank you, Narendra sir and Jaisim sir for this session. Honestly speaking, I'm still numb after watching both the sessions. It was so wonderful, and to be honest, I started introspecting my own life. This has triggered a few questions in my mind, though, and I will like to ask one of them to both of you. So Gandhi's life was different earlier, and then an event changed his approach and perspective towards everything. Through that, as architect Jaisim said, he maintained a prominent pattern in his life of Swaraj, non-violence, inclusivity, etc. So how does one how does this aspect of maintaining a pattern or learning from the existing ones translate in an architect's life, especially for students who are trying to find a path of their own?
Whom are you directing this to?
So it's for both of you all, and it's a big question based on both the sessions.
Okay, Narendra Saab, please, sir.
All right. So you're talking about the patterns and learning. Am I
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
My call on this is slightly different. I'm reminded of that story from the Upanishads when Satyakam Jabal, he goes to his teacher and he's given 100 weak cattle. And he said that you go into the forest and come back when they are 1,000 and they're healthy. Now this boy goes into the forest. And one day the bull comes and tells him, "Sir, we are already 1,000. And it's time to get back to the master." And he said, "All right." And then the bull tells him a story. So the bull, the diver bird, the swan, and the fire become his teachers. And when he comes back to his master, the master says, "Where did you learn all this? From whom did you learn? You look illuminated." He said, "Not from human beings, but I still want to learn from you." The moral of, I think you can draw for yourself, I don't want to say, but I think the teaching continues. If you look at things outside, if you look at the whole theories that have been built on teaching and aesthetic, and even to the cinematography, and the Japanese technique that is used in graphics and cinema, you realize that, you pass from your house to the school and you not notice many things. And somebody, Gita brings a flower and says, "Look, this flower, beautiful, is it not?" And you say, where did you get this flower? See, it's there all the time and on the same road that you take every day for the last several years. And you're amazed. And then you look into it, you look at it, and you realize that, my God, I've forgotten how to look at things. So you have to look at the whole thing as Indian aesthetic tells you. You have to look at the gross, you have to look at the subtle, and you have to look at the transcendental, without which you don't know anything about. So I think the story is very, very important, in this case. So I'm reminded also of years ago, I think maybe in 76 or 75, I'm not sure, my friend Vinod Gupta, Dr. Vinod Gupta, one of the first PhDs, and I went to a small village in Udaipur, close to Udaipur. And there was a sort of a social workers organization. They wanted us to help the villagers build a community center. So we said, "How do you do this?" And, we looked at their construction, we looked at their places, and they were reluctant to build anything there. I said, "Why are you building community center so far away from the village?" And then it came out in the discussion that somebody had donated that land to them. And they didn't want to let it go. But when we went deeper into the conversation, they realized that community center had to be into the village. So overnight, both of us worked on a model, model made of corrugated paper. And the technology, which said, this is the technology which exists in the village. And this is how you will build this. So look at this, that there was no drawing made, there was no technology thrust upon them. There was just some, playing a role of a catalyst. So the patterns change this way, how you address the situation. And I think this kind of a communication matters a whole lot.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You, sir.
You talked about villages and how villagers also get involved in their own development and construction and things like that. There's a question from Tejashree Latras. I'd like her to unmute herself. This is specifically on the Vardha project. Tejashree, will you unmute yourself and ask your question, please? She's from Panvel, I think. At least from Pillai's College, I think. Team, are you helping Tejashree unmute herself?
Thank you, Geeta ma'am, for giving us an opportunity to raise a question vocally as well. And thank you, Ethos team, for getting this to us. It was a wonderful insight to Gandhiji and his contribution to architecture by both Jaisim sir and Dengle sir. So Dengle sir, I am also belong to the Wardha is my hometown, and I keep going to Sevagram. Recently, I see Gandhiji is being interpreted in the sculptures on the chalks very widely, and in the form of cement and concrete construction and borrowed glass from Rajasthan, and so much of high cost construction in the houses around the around his very own low cost construction Sevagram Ashram. So would you like to throw some light on that, how local people are now interpreting wrongly or rightly the Gandhiji's life in constructions today?
If I may interrupt before you answer, there's another very interesting question in the same vein from Divya Bhamra. Can Divya from Risby College unmute yourself and ask your question, because then I think it kind of comes together as a response. Although it's not on Vardha specifically, but it is speaking on how users perceive. Divya, yeah.
Yeah, good evening, ma'am. Good evening, sir. Actually, you both mentioned something about violent architecture and environment, how it affects the environment. But I wanted just to hear that if you can please throw some light on how violent architecture can affect its users too. Not just the environment.
Can't get your words correct. What did you say? What architecture?
Violent architecture.
Violent architecture. Okay.
You mentioned that, and we are talking about how people in Vardha have kind of abandoned what was and kind of going into a different kind of architecture. So maybe you can spend some time.
Should I respond to one of them, or Dongre wants to respond?
Please go ahead.
Since this is to do with Vardha, maybe you can begin.
All right. Okay, I'll do that. I think the question, which also you forwarded to me, is connected in some way about the practices. And there was a question tied up with what you raised, Tejashree and Divya, both of you in a way. The question is, how can architects, practice and with this kind of low budgeted projects, can they survive? This is a question related to this in a way. And also the question was about low cost materials. Now, firstly, I would like to tell you that the materials that Gandhiji advocated, the natural materials, that suppose bamboo, wood, mud, cow dung, and so on, and pot tiles, they are not low cost. Don't think of them as cheap materials. The whole planet Earth takes such a long time to make a small piece of earth, 1 square inch of earth. So how can you call this cheap? The entire planet works for it. It uses its resources, and it takes genuine care in making a teak small plant into a wonderful tree. It takes years. So it's a very, very rich resource that we have, but somehow we architects have been conditioned to imagine that this is cheap stuff. And the material that comes from the industry, which is imported and downloaded in your market, is supposed to be the expensive material and synonymous with technology. I think we have to get away from this. This is a kind of an illusion that it's very, very precious. To use wood is very precious, and to use any simple material. If you now take this extension into even slums, a slum dweller doesn't need to be told how to build his humble abode. He knows it very well. So what is your role? Your role is completely different. Your role is maybe to help organize a little bit of space. Also understand the individual and the community relationship. Because the individual who's aggressive, is politically powerful, is going to grab, is going to extend, is going to include another floor. And you find that traditional communities, even in places like Bombay, fishing communities, the researchers tell us that they have a complete ethical and moral system of how to divide land for individual and public utility. And in doing so, not only the ownership is considered, but its ecological relevance, its geography, its topography, all these are integrated. So I think this factor needs to be accounted for. And this, I think, Divya, is something that is not violent, something that is not holistic, something that goes against. I believe that our philosophy tells you, Indian philosophy tells you, there are 6 enemies you are fighting. Shadripus they are called. So there are 6 enemies. If you nurse them and pamper them, then you are violent in your thought, in your conception, in your deed, in your processes, and the kind of demands that you have on anything. You have tremendous demand. You start saying in your own home that this is my space, this is not somebody's thing. I will not share with my grandfather who's visiting us for a couple of days. I lose my personal space. I think all these factors are considering the relationship between various ages and groups is very violent, and this translates into architecture of violence in many ways. Jaisim, you want to say?
What would you want me to relate to?
I remember you had to ask specifically.
Yeah, I had another question for Jaisim, sir. So this might sound a very basic question though, but sir, your topic, village as the future of urbanism, makes me question the fact that aren't modern day architects actually alienated from the rural ecosystem and lifestyle and don't understand its heritage? So how can architects be sensitive towards urbanization of villages and not impose their own sense of urbanism onto the rural structure or fabric?
Good point. Very well taken. This is the particular reason which I said that my talk will relate to Gandhi, but in a very subtle way. Because when I met Rajmohan Gandhi staying in my cottage, I didn't know he was staying there because of Rajaji. Rajaji said, go and stay with my friend architect there. He sent me home. That was in Madras. I knew very little about North India then. I only knew the South. When Rajaji sent somebody and he said, this is my son-in-law, go and stay with this place. That was one of the starts, initial thing. Sometimes I used to sit with them in the evening and discuss, and some things would happen. Then Rajaji would come and say, build me a small thing. Sadasivam, M.S. Subbulakshmi's husband, then said, build me a small hut. That's when the process of building a small hut for a billionaire, for a millionaire, for anybody who won't becomes a big question. Gandhi was a very rich man. If you see his 3-piece suit, and he knew richness, he knew wealth, he knew well. But when he came down and shed the clothes and everything out, and then came and said, this is life. I looked at it not knowing then, consciously at my way I look at architecture. Throw away the garments, throw away the thing. You will see all my 99% of my projects don't have shields and shields. They don't have. That is when Gita said, will you talk on Gandhi? I said, yes, interpretation in a different way. A pattern continues, but patterns must change to go forward and forward. That's one aspect that happens. Somebody asked about villages. Many of the houses you've seen there are only built in villages. That's why footprints don't matter. Area doesn't matter. In fact, when I start with one room for the old man and start working, the old man says, where's my other place? Where's my place for my sheep? Where's my place for my cottage? Where's my place for my dog? Then it expands. I find he's got acres and acres of land when it expands. Then I go underground, build something, comes. Cost is something else. Cost is something else that happens. It's a question of endeavor. Something that really fascinated me is I looked at cities. the 8 top cities, which I looked. Then I looked at the second levels. Big cities have gone beyond themselves, can't do anything. They've expanded outside and think. In 1980s, when we part of the urbanization factor, we had put a lot of conditions. But all of them are violated because immigration started. Now I'm hoping COVID will bring back a fact that will change the way of life, because I have lots of new young clients looking at me and say, can we have workplaces? This looked back at Gandhi. When I looked at Rajaji and Gandhi, to me, Rajaji was the person of interaction, or Sadasivam was the person of interaction, because there was very similar positions handling. The North handled the same, South we handled him. I didn't know who Gandhi was till I met Rajaji and met him, to be very, very frank. My great sister used to work in Gandhi Ashram. I said, somebody somewhere in Gujarat, to hell with it. Then came the aspect of looking at our villages, and first village and second villages, third category, fourth. I said, that is the future of urbanization. This is where the danger of our high transformation, which the Gujarat government is now trying, building huge roads joining one city to the other, dividing in between villages, is ridiculous. But they should have touched it with a softness, which could have been easily done. Unfortunately, we are now into a big dilemma of how to go about it. It happens, but economics works. This is where whenever I get an opportunity to go to a village, I was usually thinking, you have lovely life. What is, sir, we didn't ask you to come to tell us how we are living, but give us what is technology. I found they understood technology much, much better. The only thing they didn't interpret, like I'm an architect, I'm not the structural engineer, I'm not the steel engineer or the acoustic. I work with the fusion of this. He understands it. He understands it better than my city person, better than any of my great IT clients. If they're listening, they're going to kill me tomorrow. Doesn't matter. I found they have intelligence to the ground. Unbelievable. They're sitting in a cow and talking to me, and sitting on that little next pig, handling it and saying, where will I sit? The lady then comes and walks in, like he said, cow dung. When we did cow dung plaster to some of the Rishi Valley schools, and many of the, for them, they can get it. But I got a call from Columbia University, California University. We are going to register cow dung and make it a super material. I said, in India, you can't do those things. Cow dung is a phenomenal material, which even here in my house, you see the cottage around, we use it around here. But that is one material. Technology fused cow dung to higher level when I built those cottages up in the skies. When I combined materials. Gandhi was never against technology. He used to go by train, where he had to go. This is what I'm saying. He did it in a way of communication. He was a phenomenal communication. Like somebody was asking, what are the footprints of my place? Where I stay in Suvida, nobody owns anything. That is again a Gandhian philosophy, which we brought here in a very different way. We said nobody owns, but we all have a place to stay. Your area of space will be determined. Like I have a 30 by 30 space. I can do what I want with it inside, not outside. I can express my garden, I express things, but I don't own it still. Which means I enjoy the huge land. I can walk around. Now what is happening in India? Bifurcating, 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 bifurcating. This is where, I didn't show more slides, saying where we said decentralized cities. That is the future. Go live outside. Come to the city to work, which was again a Gandhian philosophy. Gandhi never stopped. Remember, he went to South Africa, he went to London, he went to the most civilized places of that time, most urbanized, and then came back and reflected. And he talked in all the languages. Not that he came from the village or something. He talked in all the languages, to me, to communicate. His force was communication. To that level, he would communicate that way, take off his shirt, take off his clothes. That was way of communicating. Put his hand, today somebody is criticizing, oh, he used to put his hands into women. That was communication of friendliness of a different nature, which those people understood. The other lot he didn't bother about. He said people will always misinterpret certain things, but that does not matter. He had his walking stick. Why did he have it? He could walk so fast without a walking. Still, he proved that he needed a walking stick for the simple expression. His glasses was an expression. His dhoti was an expression. His little god, which he puts on top, is an expression. To each of us who belong to different categories, it was a different type of understanding. He was phenomenal in that, to communicate to different people. He would walk into Nehru's mansion or Gandhi, the great Jinnah's mansion. He was as homeless sitting in the Jinnah family having lunch or dinner in that fantastic mansion. When he came to Maharaja's in Mysore, I went the other day to where he was sick in Bangalore. I didn't know. I was sitting up there in the thing, the silk farm. Sir, you know where you're sitting? That's where Gandhi sat. That is when Gita called. Same time, my environmentalist Elappa Reddy. He said, do you know we brought you to understand? Then he was sick at the time. Then he was taken to Nandi Hills. He was treated like a billionaire. Who could go in those days to Nandi Hills to stay for a month to get well? Because the Maharaj and the British government said, he cannot be left here. Not that they wanted to take care of him. People misunderstand the British very badly. He understood them very well. He understood the foreigners very well. Even when that lady who writes about him, what did he say to don't come with me? If you come with me, this lot will misunderstand. You stay away. That phenomenal writer, forget her name. And she wrote, my sister used to work a little bit on the Gandhi thing. That's when she heard this. Unfortunately, she's 96 and 98. Can't hear. These were fusions that happened. He believed in fusion. He did not believe in nationhood. That's why he said, I'm going to Pakistan. I'm going somewhere else. He said, let us have villages as a nation. It would have been phenomenal. Yes, and villages not as each one working only in its space and work, but each village communicating with the other in such a way that it becomes civilized village. That's why I call the word urbanizing the villages. It makes a big difference. That is why I was very thrilled when the villagers would come and see, but what happened to our architects? They built what they built in the city, in the village. Because the poor village, they built the stupid Parthenon-like building, the triangular roof. They are the worst architects India has. Unfortunately, we gave them Padma Bhushan and Padma Shri and all sorts of things. This is where we make a mess. If they're going to get punished, I know who are going to punish me tomorrow, it doesn't matter. But this is what he was against. He was very clear and expressed the way you want to express with the nature, with things, without hurting anything else. In fact, the next thing which I said, without hurting the surface, I was looking at the underground cities of Egypt 4,000 years back. When the mining was happening in Kolar, I went to the chief, why don't we build cities underground without disturbing any nature or anything? He said, maybe one day it will happen like going under these mountain, under the sea, one day it will happen, or it will go to space. You must remember within the next 20, 30 years, human beings are going to go to space and live in it. We're going to build huts in it. What is a hut? The expression of hut, simple living spaces. What we built, as you said, place to work, my table sitting on the ground, visitors to sit outside, a veranda to sleep, kitchen to make holidays. Kasturba was a very tough lady, poor thing, she cleaned everything. A little other place for a toilet where anybody can use. That's the minimum space. But even that minimum space is minimum 300 to 900 square feet you've worked on. It's a question of how you want to use this space, how many friends you have. Or when we built another cottage, which I showed for one of the richest men in the world, the circular cottage. I won't tell the name. He looked at me, looked at Gandhi's granddaughter, somebody, Raju was also there. What will you build? He looked at it, he said, build me a village hut. I was just sketching. He said, I want that hut, circular. So did Sri Sri when he came to the ashram and worked. He said, build me a hut. Hut is an expression, but it should have the convenience. That's why when I looked at seashell and brought seashell as a beautiful way of expressing the thing. Now everybody's, what we architects are messing up is imitating, rather you can copy, but you can't imitate and build on. No two human beings are identical. Gandhi made that very, very, very clear. None of your, nobody need follow me. JK was blunt with me on that point. I'm going, if you want to walk with me on the journey, walk, but you're free to go anywhere. Some of them went beyond him, something somewhere. He was continuing his journey. He opened my eyes to a phenomenal way of looking at building. He says, architecture, your building should never be permanent. It should change, either in its internal spaces or somewhere thing. They are just, architecture is a sense of space, a sense of emotions. Yeah, otherwise you can live, look at the birds, and they all identify the spaces. But the human being wants that interaction of the senses, the spirit, to live and live and live. That happens like a little child. I was looking at my mother-in-law, 96. I was looking at my granddaughter, the one today, she has not the expression, she's also on the line. They look at things in a phenomenal way. There is no fear. We are afraid of COVID. They're not afraid of COVID. COVID will bring a new expression. I find for the first time in human life, Architects are able to sit at home, think without any disturbance from any client or any builder, and we are one of the most fortunate professions in the thing. Only this technology, hi-fi brings me a thing, but we can wonderfully do it. Yes, survival is important, sustainability is important, but calling it by green and blue architecture, red architecture, that defies my sense. Architecture is a simple way of expressing human life in that context, in that content. That Gandhi was very, very clear, very, very clear. When I visited, thanks to you, when I visited those places which he lived in Karnataka and Mysore and Madras, I realized that man knew what he was talking about. He would, for everybody, the expression would change. He was content with context for the context. Unbelievable. That's why I'm happy he was called the Mahatma in a different way.
Thanks, Jaisim. Thanks. That's really, you took us on a journey of a lot of nostalgia when you talked about him going Nandi Hills, traveling around, and also brought in various facets of in planning itself. I think I have one last question to Dengle sir, and maybe you can end on that note also, which is interesting because we're talking about COVID, and you did talk about the learner, the teacher being under a tree, and a tree is all that is required, and a teacher being under that tree, Louis Kahn also kind of echoing that principle. And today we are here on this online, colleges are grappling with learning online and figuring out this whole space very differently. And Mahavir Ji, who's also in the session, in fact, it was a question to ask, what would Gandhiji have thought about what we are doing today? And how would he have kind of come to terms with it? So maybe a little bit on that, and then we can conclude.
Yeah, I think it is speculating because, if you draw parallels between, say, COVID and any other sort of pandemics, or even the world wars, you see, because the humanity has faced this crisis, not for the first time. It has divided all of us into, communities, people. It has brought hatred. It has brought jealousies. It has, we have used our scientific brain to create weapons of destruction, because the choice is with us.
In a sense, it has also brought us closer together in certain senses.
Yes,
We are cooperating a lot better, I think.
But this is
biological war.
very sort of
on education,
that we have been brought together.
The question was on education, on this whole because there are a lot of students here every day expected to sit in front of.
I think I'm also participating in some education program where some international students are there, and I've never done that in my life. So it's a sort of learning experience for me. But what I've learned recently is that because the students are also from software. And they tell me that they are working on strategies for new space, understanding of new kind of spaces. For instance, if you take school, you were designing schools based on certain understanding. Various standards existed, various bylaws existed, etc. Today, students, I'm told, you can vouch for that they're quite satisfied with certain, webinars and lectures going on there online. But they do have the urge to meet each other, to intermingle with each other. And so this form of school completely transforms. It doesn't remain the school that you, and I mean, Jaisim and I were learned, we were taught in those days that there are classrooms and this, that, and the other. It's not necessarily that. So the form of school has undergone some change. Now, what is that change is a challenge for all of us to sort of probe into. But let us not just imagine that COVID is changing us always. I think the calamities existed even before.
Sure.
There will be new calamities, and there will be new relationships, individual and this. Even office buildings have kind of changed in the minds of people.
Huge, big changes are happening.
You don't, because you see, all software guys are working from home.
Yes.
And their bosses are quite happy, and it is working out economic. So there goes your skyscrapers, and your vocabulary of smart cities, smart buildings, all that goes into the waste paper bin. You don't require it. And that's where you can think of Gandhi once again. So in a way, you can think of what sense he made. He said, I think Jaisim said this quite very well. The divorce between science and morality is something that Gandhi completely negated. He did not negate science. And also he said that somebody like J. Krishnamurti, he said, or Dalai Lama, who are going within themselves systematically, you know, is they are as scientific as physicists who are doing work in their labs. So the scientific is not necessarily working out formulae, but it is to understand the phenomenon of change and how that change happens and how we counter it. And the rationale for it is not for the individual, but for all.
Very well put, Venkatesh. One of the factors that I want my office today, the way architects, I always tell students of architecture, function, form, they're all there, but architecture is something more than that. Like after I left my office, the people who are really occupying my office are startups from various other professions other than an architect, and they find the environment of workspace in this COVID situation has changed something unbelievable. We should take this as an opportunity to rise. This is where I am after schools of architecture and the council to look at the entire curriculum in a totally different way and soften it. What does it matter if there are 5,000 schools of architecture or 10,000 schools of architecture? It doesn't matter. An architect is an architect who will continue to find space. Villages of the future are the future of the subcontinent. I don't want to use the word India, or the future of the subcontinent and beyond. You go to Europe, the villages have grown so much. Various places. The urbanization is a factor. Technology is a factor. It will happen. And you people in Ethos are doing a phenomenal job on this. Communicating. In fact, I'm waiting for all my villagers to be listening to this. I hope their idea works much better.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah, Aruna,
I think that's a really good note to conclude on. I would really like to thank you, Jaisim sir and Dengle sir, for this enriching session we had. We sure have a lot to introspect about everything from micro to macro. Thank you so much, Geeta ma'am, and the whole ASIDS team for creating this opportunity of learning in conjunction with NASA India. I hope everyone in some capacity will benefit from this session.
I'm sure.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Aruna, and Geeta, and Asage, and NASA, and the listeners for raising some wonderful questions. I see a whole lot of questions. And
Thank you so much. I have a little obligation of saying thank yous to a few people, including the two of you, Aruna and NASA, and Vedant, maybe from our team, who is part of our team. Yeah, really been coordinating with both of you, and Kirtna, Jaisim's grandniece, who also worked with us to put this together. Thanks to all the colleges that have been part of this. I'd like to just quickly name them: SRMIST, KTR, Katangalatur campus. I showed pictures of them today through the NASA that happened there. They would be happy. Pilumodi College of Architecture, Cuttack, NIT Trichy, Pillai's College of Architecture, Pillai's HOC actually, Vishwaniketan College of Architecture, MIT ADT School of Architecture, Pune, MITS Gwalior, APIED Gujarat, GNDC Ludhiana, MMU Ambala, and SPA Delhi for coming on board and being, encouraging their students to listen in here. And yes, thanks once again, and I hope you have a good weekend ahead and reflect more on what we've just heard. I think there's a lot of food for thought for and introspection possible.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All the best.
Can we have some videos on for one screenshot? I always love this.
How do you do that?
Team, can you just facilitate at least some of the videos here on so we can have one screenshot at least with the
technically very high. I can't make, what is it?
We'll have them in different postures and different stages of, Prakhar, video on karo, Radhika Srinivasan.
Oh, she's also there. All are there. Oh, goodies.
Aditi, Ayush Kohli, Mahavir ji. Na video on kar lijiye. There. That's Vedant's there. Yes, the study. Apurv, Anup Menon, Dignesh, Prakash Pete. If you can just switch on at least one shot with some visuals.
Ashok Kothari. Sabyasachi has gone away.
He's gone.
Who's taking the screenshot? Is Team Asaj all
don't know.
videos on, please?
Where's Kitu the Great? Where my little one? Where are you? Come
Yes,
to the screenshot. Little girl, she's the one who started it all off on me. Talk. I said, okay.
Thank you everyone. Ankita, you've taken the picture, I suppose. Thank you. God bless and stay safe.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Gita.
Right.